When we survive this sort of shock, this sort of hideous shock, we do initially think we're not going to. And I think a lot of us think that we want to die ourselves. You know, I definitely have thoughts of never of suicide myself. I'm lucky that way. I've not had those tendencies, but I've certainly had thoughts of I wouldn't mind being dead, which is a different sort of thought, or that dying would be a comfort. But life does carry you through that phase. And actually, for me, life retains a lot of meaning. And I regard myself, amazingly, as still a happy person despite what's happened.
Welcome to The Narratives of Suicide, the podcast where we bring hope, community, and a voice to those who've lost to suicide. It's where we dispel the myths of suicide. We dispel historical discourses and constructs that have been steeped in history for a very long time, and we're here with hope, love, and support for everyone out there who needs to listen to this podcast. I'm so sorry you're here, but I do hope it can give you something to use in your healing process, to be able to pick up the pieces of suicide and put them back together again in the best possible way that you can. So we're here today with Kate from the UK. So it's a reasonable time, we're both awake. And Kate sadly lost her husband in October 2017. So big welcome to you, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's only been 3.5 years, so it's still early days compared to some other people I've spoken to. So thank you for being here and being happy to share what you're going to share. Welcome.
No, thank you very much. No, it's a pleasure. It's no problem at all to talk about it, to talk about Richard. And in some ways it's helpful to me. And if it's helpful to anyone else, then that's a very good thing.
Yeah, I do think this is what it's all about, the healing narratives. It's all about us sharing our stories and sharing what we've learnt, as well as the ups and the downs, so that we can know that we're not alone, that we are stronger together. I say that a lot on my podcast and things, because stronger together, it really feels like that for me. So
yeah, absolutely.
You're a mum as well, aren't you? You've got 2 teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. So Richard and I have 2 children, and they are now 19 and 17. So at the time of his death, they were 16 and 14. And they were obviously my absolute priority and my sort of motivation from the very beginning, from day one, to keep on going, which of course is the same for all parents in this situation.
Did it feel like that, a real getting up and getting on for them to be their rock, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's all you can think of at the beginning as a parent, I think. So we were, at the time of Richard's death, living in New Zealand. We'd emigrated there just under 2 years previously. So Richard was an intensive care doctor and anaesthetist, and I'm also medical. I'm a GP with a special interest in palliative care. So in fact, I'm mainly a hospice doctor. And we'd lived in Australia and New Zealand previously when the kids were younger, and also before we had children. So we sort of ping-ponged back and forth. And we decided to make a final move back to New Zealand in 2016.
Wow.
And the move was a very positive one for our family, but came with a huge amount of stress. And Richard in particular bore the brunt of that stress, because although he was a very enthusiastic, sort of energetic person, we had an awful lot of difficulty with our emigration process, because just a few months prior to our flights, to our scheduled departure from the UK, he got the letter that every doctor dreads, which is a letter from the General Medical Council informing him that he had had a complaint made against him. And that's what we all, as doctors, fear, because most of us go into medicine to help people and to be a force for good. And we worry all the time about getting something wrong or being perceived to get something wrong. And Richard had never had a complaint previously and was absolutely horror-struck to have one. It wasn't the sort of complaint that we felt would likely be upheld, and indeed it wasn't. Actually, it took a few months, as these things always do, but it was actually thrown out and he was completely exonerated. But the shadow that it cast over him as a person and him as a doctor and us as a family about to emigrate was enormous, and contributed to him developing a depression once we were actually in New Zealand and establishing ourselves as a family over there. So he had had depression once previously, some 20 years previously, over 20 years ago, I think. But so it wasn't something that had dogged him for years or affected our family life for years, not at all. But he did develop a depression, went onto medication, and responded within a few weeks and was absolutely fine for many months. And we established ourselves over there. We very quickly were welcomed into the community. We lived in a beautiful house by the sea on this kind of glistening blue harbour, all the greens and blues that you associate with New Zealand. And we both settled into our new jobs. And obviously our focus, as with any parent, was to settle our kids in. And that went well for son, but less well for our daughter, who was already 16 by that stage. So we wasn't a completely smooth process. We did have challenges, but his mental health settled quickly. Right. He enjoyed his new job and all the challenges that came with it in a positive sense. He had great colleagues and he came off his antidepressants. He gradually, as you're meant to do, under the supervision of his GP. Yeah. And then he was fine for a few months. More than fine. He was kayaking, he was deep sea diving, he was open water swimming. Of all four of us, he loved New Zealand probably the most. Yeah. And then he had a trip back to the UK for a conference and to see family and friends, and got the most terrible jet lag on his return. And he was on call quite a lot in New Zealand, more than he had been in Britain, which really disrupted his sleep as well. Okay. And that combination, I think, led to his mental health starting to decline again. Right. And what happened was that he went back onto the same medication, one of the standard SSRIs that is the first line for depression and sometimes anxiety too.
Yeah, like antidepressant, isn't it? Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know SSRI.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm using an acronym, not helpful. And this time, not only did it not help, I think it actually made him worse. So it seemed to contribute to a real sense of agitation, which, as is well known, is a risk factor for suicide. He became withdrawn. He was exhausted constantly. He was slowed physically in his movements. He walked more slowly. He did things more slowly. He was a very brisk, energized person normally. He upped his exercise because he was always one to keep very fit, but almost that became detrimental. I think looking back, he was losing weight. I think he was exercising too much. His sleep was absolutely just awful by that stage. And one day I took my daughter for a dog walk, some late afternoon, and left him in charge of dinner. Jake was in the house, so my daughter Amy and I were out maybe for an hour. Jake was in the house with Richard. And when I came back, he had taken his own life in the guest annex of the house. He'd locked the door and just got on with it.
Oh dear.
So middle of the day with his son at home, just completely pointing to how disordered his thinking must have become. Because he was a devoted dad. He would never have wanted to expose his beloved boy to, Jake could have found him on his own before I'd got home. Luckily I was home. I was there, but even so, to do it where he knew that he would be found by at least one, maybe several family members, it's just so hard to understand. And then of course we had the resuscitation attempts and the paramedics and the police and, the whole drama of it all. And then from the next day onwards, it was all about picking up the pieces and trying to just keep going day after day with the new situation. And the admin of death, which those of us who have experienced such bereavement are well aware of. It's a hugely intensive period of admin that comes straight on the back of an event like that. And you barely have time to think for a long time or grieve. I certainly didn't have much time to grieve for the first bit.
Yeah, and just the shock from going out for a walk. And I guess, was there any indication? Did he talk about suicide or was there any?
So this is something that I, of course, especially as a health professional, feel absolutely terrible about. So he implied to me a couple of times that things were getting really bad for him. For some reason, and I can't really understand this about myself, particularly as, of course, I'm trained to deal with mentally ill people, and I have done for years, especially as a GP. In fact, ironically, I've always had quite an interest in mental health, but I could not bring myself to ask him that question outright. It felt like there was a taboo around it within my own family unit, which was a happy one. It just seemed to me, it was very hard for me to do that. So it was alluded to obliquely by him a couple of times. And I simply tried to be supportive and to tell myself that it's well known that a protective factor against suicide is having a family around you, a family who loves and supports you. And he did have a loving and supportive family. And we talked a lot about getting him more help. And in fact, we had by that time made him a psychiatrist appointment. And he was due to see that psychiatrist just 3 days later. So he talked often in quite vague terms about how badly he was feeling. He would say things like, I feel really awful today. I feel exhausted. And I know now that if I had tackled him about that, said, well, how exactly are you feeling? And are you having thoughts of suicide? Which of course I would have done to any patient. I think he could have been saved. I would have marched him off to the psychiatrist much more quickly, or taken him to A&E, or taken him straight back to his GP. But because I was constantly telling myself, antidepressants take a while to kick in. They kicked in last time. They worked exactly on week 5 last time. It's week 6 now. Just taking a few more days this time. Any day now they're going to kick in.
Of course, you had the psychiatrist appointment. You had, what more can you do other than encourage support for him to seek help?
Yeah, I thought we were doing all the right things and being patient. When you're a doctor, it's sometimes quite easy to circumvent the system or go straight to a friend, and we were trying to be good patients almost, and to do the right thing and to be patient and let the medication kick in. And of course, really now I know that he was so obviously going downhill quickly. It was wrong to be that patient. We should have got medical attention much sooner. And in that sense, I wonder if he was actually shown a disservice by me being medical myself. I think if I'd been a layperson, I might have been much more scared. But of course, all my life, I've treated people who have been suicidal, but not acted on their impulses.
Yes.
Because they feel safe, they felt held, they felt looked after, they had a supportive family. And suicide is often thought about, but doesn't actually come to pass. And I think it just seemed to me an impossibility that it would come to pass within my own family unit, which was a sound, stable one, and where there was lots of love and mutual support.
Yeah. And it's happened so quickly, didn't it?
Yes.
From just the deterioration of mental health as well as the actual day. It's all suddenly like a bam. It's like a...
Yeah, you see, I think there were personality factors that were at play. He was a very decisive person. Once he'd made up his mind, he got on with it. And that was definitely a risk factor, which again, I think I was too close up to the situation to fully see.
Oh, it's so hard, isn't it? Like you say, the professional in you, I can hear the criticisms coming through of yourself, which is...
Yes. I mean, I'll live with that for the rest of my life.
How do you assimilate that with talking so openly? I mean, for me, my brother came to me a year before he took his life and he said, I feel suicidal, but I'm not going to tell anybody because they'll section me. And we talked about it again, got him help, got him support. He was seeing therapists. He was actually seeing a therapist then for another year. Cranial psychotherapist, everything. Tried to find him all the support, kept checking in with him regularly. And obviously I wasn't living with him. So for me, my brother lives a distance away, and still I had that same impact on that day of what more could I have done? And still to this day, as a counsellor, that doesn't fit with my identity. I'm a counsellor and I speak to suicidal people all the time and I help them and contain them, like you say. And again, they don't act on it. They're okay. They're safe. They get, I don't want to say better, but they cope. And so for me, again, I saw that of my brother, just that he's getting support, he's getting help. It'll be okay, of course. And what more can either of us have done other than you were getting support with the psychiatrist, psychologist, we were sitting back, we were watching carefully, but so helpless almost as well. And I think this is the difficulty with me with suicide. It's not our act, but we feel so responsible afterwards.
Yes, I mean, for quite a long time, I felt like I might as well have killed him myself. It was that strong a feeling. I felt like I had to live the rest of my life with that feeling of having committed a murder.
Yeah.
That's how strong it was for quite a long time. And it's less strong now. And I have found ways to retain a sense of meaning in life and to sort of to come to terms to some extent with what happened. But yeah, it's still a very big part of my day-to-day life, really, and my persona and my psyche.
Yeah. Huge, isn't it? How did you do that then? So you say you found a way and it's still there, it's still present, it's still too big and it's part of who you are. But if anything, what helped you with that process then of, I want to say letting go of the responsibility, but it's obviously not let go completely. But
yes, no, but the process is underway. I mean, it's definitely less intense than it was. So I think all the things that we know to be helpful in such situations. So I'm really lucky to have an absolute army of friends, both in New Zealand, and we came back 2 months later to the UK, to a place where we'd lived for 10 years before, to Herefordshire. So both in New Zealand and in the UK, I've had enormous amounts of support from very close friends, but also family, my parents, Richard's parents, his siblings, my sibling. Yeah, so I'm extremely fortunate in that respect. And people have been very understanding and absolutely there for chats, dog walks. So I'm very lucky in that respect. Also, my children, although it was very difficult, particularly for the first year, the fact that they're now doing so much better and are so steady now within their own lives, and they are so clearly thriving to the extent that you ever can when you have this tragedy in your personal history, that is hugely satisfying and pleasing to me, and such a relief. And then work, actually, because I have a very meaningful job in a hospice with colleagues who are fantastic and a job that I love. Even though it's very difficult emotionally, of course, I'm working with people and their relatives around death or the approach of death, which of course is difficult with my own experience. It's challenging, but also actually really helpful. And that's been an interesting sort of journey, really. Yeah. And then also I have a partner, Simon, who I've been with for over 2 years now. And while that in no way replaces Richard, it's still hugely helpful. And he's very loving and very understanding, actually. We don't live together, but he's there for me and he is respectful of Richard's ongoing place in my family life.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I think a lot of widows I speak to, that moving on comes with a lot of guilt, doesn't it? A lot of shame and a lot of, well, I won't mention that to anybody because, they'll make judgments about me. So it's lovely to hear.
Oh yeah, I've never had that at all, interestingly. That's thankfully one thing I haven't suffered from at all. I've had no guilt at all or shame about that because Richard was such a he was very generous of spirit and very matter of fact. And I just always have known that he would really want me to move forwards and to meet someone. And I've always felt very confident of that. It's been problematic vis-a-vis the children, as you can imagine, for all sorts of reasons. But it's not been problematic for me in my own heart vis-a-vis Richard, who I sort of very much still feel like I've got an ongoing relationship with, in a sense.
Yeah, and it sounds as if you're handling that between you, and he's given the space for that as well. Simon is, so yeah.
Yes, that's right. In that respect, it feels healthy and good.
And I guess your children have left home now, are they?
So one has and one hasn't. Okay. But as you know, with university terms rather, even the one who has is home a lot still, especially during the pandemic. So yeah, one has semi-left home and one will leave home in September. So yeah, but we're in a much better place as a unit of 3 than we were initially. I mean, the shock took a long time to wear off and both of them had a lot of issues really, particularly around anxiety actually for the first year and needed some help with that and anger. And we went through all sorts of challenges as a family unit initially.
And as a mum then, to put that into perspective in terms of how to support them as teenagers, because I guess a lot of people question, what do we tell the children? Do we tell them the truth? But with your case, they were there.
Yeah, absolutely. They were there that day. Yeah, there was no shielding them from any part of it.
No.
That ship had sailed. That was just a non-issue, unfortunately.
And then it was just getting on with it. And so how would you explain that support? Did they get support? Did you find them support?
Yeah. So initially, neither of them wanted support. It was offered straight away, pretty much. But neither of them wanted it. It was too early, which was very understandable. So initially, they coped with a lot of distraction. They watched lots of films together. They still had their studies, of course. I mean, Jake had one day off and then went straight back to school. Amy had a completely contrasting approach. We decided straight away that we needed to come back to the UK. So Amy never went back to school in New Zealand. She started homeschooling herself in preparation for coming back to the UK in a very different curriculum over here, because she was going to be coming back midway through her GCSE year. So she coped differently from Jake. And then they would come for walks with me. They would come for dog walks with me. Most days, even just briefly, so that we had some time together. But otherwise, it was distraction that they used as a technique initially.
Yeah.
And actually, so did I. So much admin to do that that was a distraction for me as well. And then afterwards, once we were back in the UK and getting settled in, and they were back at sixth form college and school respectively, they still didn't want support for many months. And then eventually both accepted support, but even then it took a while, particularly for Amy, to find the right person, because it's not easy to find the right fit in terms of counselling, is it? And as you know, nowadays everyone is guided towards CBT, which is the sort of almost seen as the gold standard, but it didn't suit Amy at all. So eventually we moved away from CBT to a different form of counselling, and she finally found the help that she needed.
Which one of that, just out of interest, so that others might see that that's
so I mean, CBT, of course, as a lot of people know, is very focused on sort of disordered thinking, isn't it? And trying to find ways to...
Yeah, it's looking at your thoughts and kind of trying to control them more. And it's very practical. It's got homework and it's very based on, standards of measurement. So
yes, exactly. And of course, it's got a great track record for many conditions. But certainly for a teenager, Amy found the constant return to number scales, gradings. she just hated that. And also a lot of it was over the phone. So it just didn't suit her at all. She just started making up numbers eventually for the questions. And, because you're asked a lot on the scale of 0 to 10, how do you feel? She just got so sick of it. She would just say 3, 8. She just disengaged from it. But that's not to say that I know from experience as a healthcare professional, it can be very helpful for some things, but not for her personally, unfortunately. So
what did you go to? What did she find better?
Well, she found a counsellor who talked to her much more sort of, I guess, psychoanalytically, I suppose, but who also used a lot of body work, so mindfulness based techniques. Yeah, so Amy was taught to be in her body a lot more, use her breath to anchor herself. Things that I've tried to talk to her about for years, but of course she wouldn't take it from me, merely her mother, but from someone else. So she found, but I don't know what the counsellor's official approach was.
Okay, what they call maybe a bit psychodynamic.
Yes, a combination of those two things, I would say. Yeah.
What about you? Have you had any form of support through groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I had support in New Zealand from a very good psychologist who helped me for a few sessions. And then I had ongoing support through the hospice that I work at from our very good clinical psychologist who's attached to the hospice, but who also offers supervision. So he was absolutely wonderful. And I saw him every couple of weeks for many months, probably the best part of a year, actually. And again, his approach is very much grounded in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I really like. Almost like a combination, isn't it, of CBT, mindfulness.
Love it.
Very helpful for me. So that was really positive.
Great. So that was a year, so it was a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe not quite that long, maybe 7 or 8 months. I can't really remember. And it certainly eventually became more spaced out to more like every 3, every 4 weeks. Yeah, it wasn't quite as many sessions as I was initially implying, but it certainly went on for a while. It was helpful. And then we both realised that I didn't really need to come along anymore.
Right. So it's helped in terms of, because acceptance and commitment therapy is really about acceptance of thoughts.
Exactly.
Literally acceptance and commitment therapy, and committing to behavioural thing instead. So you might hear a thought come up saying, it's your fault that Richard died. But then you use that thought to say, that's just like an old passenger talking to me. How do I want to be? What do I want to be going forward? And then you act in that way. So, literally acceptance and commitment therapy, you act in a certain way, the way that you want to be towards your values. So
yeah, exactly. That's a really good explanation. And you're right about values being absolutely central. It's about defining your values and living up to them as best as you can, despite your changed situation. Yeah. So very helpful, very practical, very grounded. And so what I've sort of done with both the grief and the guilt is reached a stage of acceptance that they're both going to be with me forever, I think. But they don't take up quite so much space as they used to. But they're still absolutely always going to be a part of my life and of who I am.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Thoughts, they feel so real. So when we feel guilty, and feelings, so when we feel guilty and we have a thought that it was my fault, so that feels so real, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I think acceptance and commitment therapy allows you to say, oh, is that actually true? Is that actually real? Or yes, it might feel like it. Yes, I might be thinking it and it feels really powerful, because our brains are super clever. They're super powerful. So they're going to make us feel that that's real. But we step forward then, don't we, towards what kind of person do I want to be? I want to be a good doctor.
Yes.
I want to be a good mum. I want to be a good or whatever it is, a fun mum.
Yeah, exactly. Friend, partner, all of those things. Those are my values and the values of most people, I'm sure, in this sort of situation. You just want to make the best of your new life, diminished as it is in a huge way, but of course still important in its other components and valuable.
Wow. So is there anything else you found helpful? You went to a support group, didn't you? You've been to support?
Yes. So just at the time when I came back to the UK, a few months later, Claire Gerardo, who's the former chair of the Royal College of GPs and a very prominent, well-known doctor here in the UK, she set up a bereavement group for those who had suffered the loss of a doctor loved one to suicide, because it is quite a thing. Doctors are at higher risk of suicide than the rest of the population, partly through the stress of their job, partly through perfectionist traits that they often share with each other, and certainly partly because of the risk that having a complaint made against you also carries as an independent risk for suicide. So she set up this group, which has been a real support. I was one of the founder members of that group, which started, I would say, about 3 years ago now. And it met initially in London every 3 months and now has become a monthly Zoom group, given the situation with the pandemic. And it's been very valuable for me, although it's quite a harrowing experience sometimes, because we're constantly having new arrivals who are in the first throes of that very raw grief that we all remember from when it was raw for us. So it's not always a comfortable experience, but it's very valuable and comforting knowing so many other people in a similar situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more we hear stories and share stories, the more we heal. Absolutely. This is why I'm doing the podcast anyway. So
Yes.
that's a bit obvious, I think that. But so how can people get hold of that group if they have lost a medical professional to suicide? I'll drop it in the comments then. I'll drop it in the links.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that, probably the best thing would be, let me think, I will find a link that Claire Gerardo would be the contact for it.
Right.
And I'm sure that she has a public email address that I could find. I'll think about that after the podcast ends.
Right. And we'll drop it in the comments when we've got one. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Tell us a bit more about the move back, because I guess you just moved to New Zealand. It sounds a bit like a dream where you'd been there a lot. It was something that as a family you wanted to do. And then you were settling in, the kids were settling into they'd shifted lives, hadn't they?
Yes.
That teenage year.
Yeah.
I said to my daughter, can we move to New Zealand a few times? And she says, no, I'm not leaving my friends, because she's 19, because she's at that age.
Yes.
So I can imagine how difficult that was just to get your teenagers to leave their friends.
Exactly. It was. Yeah, you're right.
And then this move back, what instigated that again was because you were still in a stage of shock after 2 months. So
yes, that's right. And everyone says, do not make any major life decisions in the initial acute throes of grief. So we completely ignored that. And the very next day, we decided to move back to the UK. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that the kids needed that. I would not have made that decision immediately at all. I tell you what, I loved my life in New Zealand. We had made a really good life for ourselves. We'd been there by that stage, 18, 20 months, I think. And we just couldn't have landed more on our feet in terms of friends. They're just a stunning physical environment. And our jobs were going well as well. And the problem was my daughter just hadn't settled. And she and Richard were super close. They looked alike. They had the same quite fiery temperament. We called them the clones. And I just knew immediately that there was now absolutely no possibility of her settling in this country now that this absolute shocking tragedy had befallen us. So I sort of acquiesced immediately. We had a conversation the next day and we all agreed that we had to go back. Okay. And that was that really. And I just had to say goodbye mentally to the dream, the new life, and concentrate on getting back to the old life, which of course had many wonderful good things about it. And now that we are back, we're settled. And as you know, Herefordshire is absolutely beautiful and you just have to make the best of your situation. But, particularly as the pandemic hit, and all my friends are cavorting on the beaches of New Zealand, and it's quite hard to see them on social media at times, let me tell you. Oh. But you just have to do what you have to do, don't you? It was horrifically difficult, in terms of the logistics. Yeah. We'd only just bought a house. It needed work doing to it. So like a week after Richard had died, we had the builders in, trying to get it saleable. I think we'd bought it 6 weeks before. There was so much bureaucracy, bringing my job to an end, bringing all our sort of paperwork, restarting our UK paperwork, ending the New Zealand. But you can just imagine re-enrolling the kids into their old schools, etc., etc. Just went on and on.
Oh, you had so much to do, didn't you?
Yeah. So it was a really difficult time and on virtually no sleep, because you know how you just don't sleep initially for weeks, do you? And you can't eat. So I lost 5 kilos in the first few weeks and I was barely sleeping. So I was living on my nerves, really, looking back. Yeah. But it was the most amazing distraction, I'll give it that,
Geez, I don't know about distraction or just absolute.
Yeah, it was really tough.
Oh, geez. Shows how strong you are there when you have to be.
You have to be, you have to do it, don't you?
I don't know how you did that. I just, can't even imagine the amount of, like you say, just the admin of the funeral and all of those is enough, let alone moving.
I know. I did have help with the memorial because I couldn't believe that in addition to all of this, I also had to organise a funeral or a memorial service. I just couldn't see how that was possible. And there's a sort of pressure, isn't there, to get on with it? Like you're not given a lot of time. There's a certain social pressure that it has to be within a very small number of weeks, isn't it? Yeah. And so with Richard, we organised a direct cremation because the kids were horrified at the thought of any ceremony involving the body being there with you and then taken away behind a curtain to be burnt. They was just like, what? Yeah. They had no experience of any funerals prior to that. So it was my neighbours who had lost one of their children actually as a young adult, and they explained to me that they had had a direct cremation. I thought that sounded brilliant. So we organised a direct cremation for Richard, but we had a wonderful, very moving beach memorial for him on the beach that was just a few yards from our front door. And it was a really lovely occasion, which he would have loved because he was all about the outdoors and the ocean. So that worked out really well. But I if I hadn't had an army of friends to help me with the organising of it, it wouldn't have happened because I just didn't have the headspace to do a good job of that myself.
Yeah, it sounds like it was done for the children as well. You really went with them. If they wanted, they couldn't imagine the funeral, the cremation going. So then
No, it was all about them, because Richard was absolutely not someone who stood in ceremonies. So I knew that he would be like, well, look, whatever works for you as a family. I knew that he would just want us to do whatever worked for the kids in particular. So yeah.
It's the mother as well, isn't it? And you just constantly, what's best for them, even if it's moving back. And then the amount of strength you found then to do that, to make that happen.
Yes, that's right. Again, it had to be about them.
Yeah. I'm really pleased you've had all that support. I'm really pleased that you've got Simon now as well in your life to keep moving on, and you've had this therapy and you're able to, even though we're not ignoring those thoughts are still there and those feelings are still there, you've made the best you possibly can in 3 and a bit years, haven't you?
Yes. Oh no, I think so. Yes.
And it's a process. It's going to keep unraveling, in that making it the best you can is going to be the same in 6 months and in a year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the most important things that was part of that healing was finding the right home. Actually, it's amazing. For a few months, we were kind of homeless, really. When we got back to the UK, we were lent a friend's flat for a few weeks, and then we moved into a rental when our furniture arrived back.
Right.
But all of that felt quite unstable. And then when I found a house, to actually buy, I mean, it's a modest brick 1950s semi. There's nothing special about it, particularly from the outside, but it's lovely inside and kind of light and cheerful and calming. And from the moment that we moved in here, that's really helped. And it's really made me realize how much having a home that you love helps with your mental state, really. It's given me a new appreciation for all the displaced millions around the world who don't have that. That's been a huge part of the process for us. And then, of course, being with Simon, because when you've been with someone for, I think I was with Richard for 20 years, to be with nobody at all and to have that hole in your life was just so awful for me on a personal level. That was really a huge step forward as well for me.
I'm wondering as well about working in a hospice. You work with people dying.
Yes.
Before Richard died, you were in as a medical professional. I know it's very different. I mean, there are death cafes in the UK where it's the idea from the death cafes. We get used to the idea that we're all going to die because it's such a taboo subject. We don't want to even think about it. We're too, oh no, it's not going to happen to me, fearful. The more we can get used to the idea that we are going to die and other people are going to die, then when we do, I mean, I hope by having this ethos in my life that when I do pass away, my children have got used to the idea that I'm going to pass away. It's not a sudden massive shock, because we know how much the shock factor plays a part in complicated grief, in severe grief.
Yes.
And that's the idea of the death cafes, that we just talk about it. It sounds morbid, may sound very morbid to people, but the idea behind them is that we make it less of a taboo subject, which I'm trying to do with suicide with these podcasts and things, to say, again, if we can create a less taboo subject around it, it will make it a little bit easier maybe for suicide loss survivors to find the support, to even feel that they can go and get the support. So what's your kind of sense of that in terms of your own acceptance of death through your hospice work as a medical professional, and how much that's helped you or not?
I think it's helped a lot. For years, I'd already worked in a hospice by the time that Richard died. And it's something that, is sort of almost a normal part of my working life. So although the shock of losing him was absolutely enormous and affects me to this day, I still really can't quite believe it a lot of the time. Death itself, I'm sort of quite comfortable talking about, and the kids and I have always been quite comfortable talking about death. And, with two medical parents, the conversations at the dinner time were often pretty morbid and pretty frank. So we've never had a taboo really around talk of death within the family. And I don't think that the kids were even aware that suicide carried much of a taboo, really. So I don't think that they feel any shame themselves that Richard died by suicide. I've certainly never felt that. To me, it's the well-known fatal complication of depression. But of course, as we all know, it does still carry a stigma, and death remains, suicide, and death remains something that we as society do find a lot of difficulty talking about. I suppose what helps me is that I don't have a strong sense that something continues after our life here. I'm not a formally religious person, but I find it very hard to believe that this is all there is and that death is definitely the end. So I do find comfort in that. Richard wasn't formally religious at all either, but his ashes are scattered on several beaches in New Zealand, and also in Pembrokeshire, which is a place we've gone a lot to as a family. And I find huge comfort in being on the beach in Pembrokeshire where I started, and walking there and talking to him. And I have a place that I go and sit locally as well. on a bench where I feel close to him. So yeah, to me, my work, I guess, and my familiarity with death has helped, I think. But the shock.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought behind that as well, though, isn't there? Scattering his ashes in England, the UK, where you can still connect.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I could never have kept his ashes at home in an urn, because he was someone who lived for the outdoors. So I just immediately wanted them to be outside, and as his molecules to be mingling with the air and the sea and the sand, and that's what we did, and that feels right.
Yeah, and in the UK, so you can still go and sit on the beach.
Yes, definitely.
And feel, yeah,
and I've been back to New Zealand since he died and been able to see a tree that we planted for him with our neighbours and friends, and where we used to live, and that's obviously continuing to grow, which is lovely, and to also visit the beaches where his ashes are scattered. So that remains very, very important link to me, and I hope that post-pandemic I'll be able to go back on a sort of regular basis to the place that we both loved.
Shows that thought that you put into those things at the time, planting the tree, doing all those things, or with support from
yes,
friends,
yeah.
All that thought is now a comfort, although painful. To go and sit on the beach, I can imagine it's painful. Like when I go and visit my brother, where he's buried in a meadow with my mum.
Yes.
And again, it might be painful and upsetting, but that's okay. It's okay to be upset and moved, and to at the end feel that you've spent that time somewhere, I think. And we have to create that, don't we, in amongst all the grief. So the fact you did that, you created that for yourself, and with the tree and all those things, it's mind-blowing, really. And that's why I think the surrealness comes through what we can survive when we have to.
Yes.
And what we do when we have to.
Yeah, that's right. We don't want to have to be put through these tests, but they come to us regardless.
Wow. Is there anything else? It's an amazing story of strength. That's what I feel, a real story of strength, and your strength as a family with the support you've had. And Richard's a part of that, isn't he? That strength, because they're his children. He brought them up to be strong and in their own way. And it's a real story of that, I think. And is there anything else you want to share with people before we finish that might help other people?
Well, only that it is possible to survive this sort of thing, even though at the time you think it is going to kill you too. And I think a lot of us, when we survive this sort of shock, this sort of hideous shock, we do initially think we're not going to. And I think a lot of us think that we want to die ourselves. I definitely have thoughts of never of suicide myself. I'm lucky that way. I've not had those tendencies, but I've certainly had thoughts of I wouldn't mind being dead, which is a different sort of thought, or that dying would be a comfort. But life does carry you through that phase. And actually, for me, life retains a lot of meaning. And I regard myself, amazingly, as still a happy person despite what's happened. But the interesting thing is that the thought of death remains a sort of comfort to me because of how much I miss Richard all the time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, to fear death less as a result of what's happened. So I regard that as almost another plus in a weird and slightly dark way.
Yeah, death is a comfort because of your beliefs around it. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Very moving, yeah. To the rawness of it, really, yeah.
Yes. I mean, that definitely hasn't fully gone away, and I don't really expect it to. And it's not the main focus, of course. Day to day, there's lots of things that give life still meaning and a lot of pleasure to me. But I don't have the same fear of death that I used to, and that's because of my love for Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely way to end, for your love for Richard. Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I hope it served you and given you something for your journey with suicide. Come back and subscribe, like, do whatever you need to do on your platform to help us to raise awareness of suicide, because the more we keep saying the word, the more we can gain support for us left behind, and the more we can raise awareness of the word and how society sees it, and reduce this stigma that's so attached to it. Please get in touch. You can find me on my website, suicidegriefsupport.com. I really want to hear from you. But for now, please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And remember, we are stronger together.